B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, January 9th, 2019. Well, there's a fascinating story that's breaking out of Politico in Washington, D.C. that shows that a group of Russians notified the NSA that they had a suspect, the guy who might have been responsible for leaking Vault 7, the vaunted hacking tools of the American intelligence community. Now, the suspect in the case has been identified for a while. He is Harold Martin, who lives near Fort Meade in Maryland. And he's worked for various contractors who work for the NSA, including Booz Allen Hamilton. And it's not too ironic that it was a tweet from Ed Snowden that alerted me to this report. So Harold Martin, and we are going to get into some deep ironies here, he is accused of, over a 20-year period, collecting more than a terabyte, and that's a huge bundle of data, of secrets, that he kept at his home. And he's being investigated for improper collection of government data and violating his security clearances and protocols. So far, he is not being accused of leaking Vault 7 or anything else, and he has not been suggested as someone who will be tried under the Espionage Act. So that much we know. But what Politico reports is that Kaspersky Lab, which is a computer security firm based in Moscow and run by a guy named Yevgeny or Eugene Kaspersky, and during the final years of the Obama administration, Kaspersky was demonized. We were told that they couldn't be trusted, that their virus protection software had to be removed from all military and government installations. And basically, it was suggested that Kaspersky Lab is no different from the FSB, the old KGB. And so this could be a devious move by Kaspersky Lab, where they decided that through their ordinary investigations, they found different kinds of American-based hacker software on computers that they were asked to clean up. And this led them to knowledge about some of the CIA's tools. So this guy, Harold or Hal Martin, is scheduled to go on trial this June. He was arrested August 27th of 2016 following a search of his home. He was indicted in February 2017, charged with 20 counts of unauthorized and willful retention of national defense information. Now you notice that Ed Snowden is not accused of something like that, because there is evidence that he released the information that he collected. So the arrest followed some rather unusual tweets that came from an account with the word Hal and a bunch of nines. It's like Hal on 5 nines. And so he sent some Twitter messages to Kaspersky in Moscow. They arrived just 30 minutes before the anonymous group known as Shadow Brokers began dumping classified NSA tools online and announced an auction to sell more of the stolen code for the price of $1 million in Bitcoin. Shadow Brokers, which, according to Politico, is believed to be connected to Russian intelligence, I don't know that to be true. I think it's an open question who the Shadow Brokers are. At any rate, that's what they assert. Anyway, they claim Shadow Brokers said it had stolen the material from an NSA hacking unit that the community has dubbed the Equation Group. So these Twitter messages led the people at Kaspersky to try to investigate who HAL 99999 was. And it didn't take them long, because they discovered that Hal Martin had been trolling for babes on some site on the internet. They found a personal ad seeking female sex partners. The ad on a site for people interested in bondage and sadomasochism included a real picture of Hal Martin, identified him as 6'4" and 50 years of age, living in Annapolis, Maryland. A different search led them to a LinkedIn profile for Hal Martin, described as a researcher in Annapolis Junction, technical advisor and investigator on cyber offensive issues. So, get this. This guy was taking stuff home for 20 years. Never got caught. Now, we know they launched this insider threat program after Ed Snowden went rogue. And they threatened all kinds of people with punishment and, loss of security clearance if they didn't toe the line and follow all the rules. And so, yes, it is deeply ironic that Kaspersky, a Russian-based firm that the U.S. government has implied is a tool of the Russian government, was the source of the information that led them to discover Hal Martin and his alleged crimes. So, this is just amazing. And I will acknowledge that there could be much more to this story. I don't pretend to know everything. Never do. But what we see here is that Kaspersky did a big favor for the U.S. government. And this happened after they were iced out by the Obama administration. So we learn that Kaspersky discovered some of the equation group tools on computers in the Middle East in 2014. Its antivirus software later detected them on a machine in the U.S. in about 2014. Kaspersky believed the machine had been infected with surveillance software, but in fact it was the home computer of a different NSA employee whose name is Foe, who had improperly taken home classified documents and NSA code he was helping develop that were related to the equation group toolset. So Kaspersky's software uploaded materials from Foe's computer as part of a routine operation, and once they discovered that the collection they had was not malware, Eugene Kaspersky ordered his researchers to destroy those files. But that collection helped fuel U.S. allegations that Kaspersky itself poses a security threat. Now, I don't know if Kaspersky is a tool of the Russian government, but with the Russophobia we have, it's sufficient for people to say, well, he's Russian, he's based in Moscow. That's all we need to know. So in 2015, the Department of Homeland Security issued their directive banning Kaspersky software from civilian government computers because, quote, the Russian government could capitalize on access provided by Kaspersky to compromise federal information and information systems. So this is more egg on the face of our, air quotes please, intelligence community. And it shows the ridiculous levels of secrecy. And I've got a couple of stories today that are based on improper or incomplete, imperfect redactions of allegedly secret information. And it has become a cartoon. Our spies are out of control. And they are in a position to deflect blame by blaming Russia, China, North Korea. And some of that certainly may be true. But in the hall of mirrors they have assembled, we can't believe any of this stuff. So here's the big story of the day in the New York Times. And I'm sure Rachel Maddow's going to go to town with this, because we have learned through an improper redaction on the part of Paul Manafort's lawyers that the lies that were alleged to have been told by Manafort to prosecutors after he entered into his cooperation agreement reveal what is called the clearest evidence to date that the Trump campaign may have tried to coordinate. Now, we hear that word collusion and meddling and how Putin meddled in our election to get Trump elected. But here in the very first paragraph of this New York Times story, they acknowledge that the rest of the evidence to date is not compelling. It is not conclusive. So this document, which ties Manafort to Konstantin Kilimnik, who is alleged to be connected to the Russian government, and a former spy, that's the allegation that is made. Well, that Manafort provided Kilimnik with polling information from the Trump campaign starting in about April of 2016. Now, we know that Manafort volunteered to work for free on the Trump campaign. We know that he made contact through Kilimnik with the Russian oligarch that he owed millions of dollars to, Deripaska. And that Manafort was trying to use his position on the Trump campaign to get even, to get out of the debts that he owed to Deripaska. So, on the surface, the first theory that appeals to me is that Manafort did this out of greed and self-motivation, not to try to help Trump win the election, but to try to reduce his debt load at a time when he appeared to be drowning and desperate for cash. And so here's another quote from the Times report here. The document gave no indication of whether Trump was aware of the data transfer or how Kilimnik might have used the information. But from March to August of 16, when Manafort worked for the campaign, Russia was engaged in a full-fledged operation using social media, stolen emails, and other tactics to boost Mr. Trump, attack Clinton, and play on divisive issues such as race and guns. And you know, the American public was so unified before Russia divided us and sowed all that division. This is just so preposterous. It really is. And I could be wrong. Down the road, we might learn that Paul Manafort was deeply engaged in collusion with the Russians to tip the election to Trump. But the evidence we have so far doesn't support that. That is simply the inflamed speculation of the promoters of the Russiagate narrative. And as I've argued before, I believe Trump is deeply corrupt. He is corrupt with Russian interests. Felix Sater was, laundering Russian money into Trump condos on a regular basis. And I think that may have been what Trump tried to cover up. But all around him were people like Manafort, like his son-in-law, who was trying to get new loans for the Kushner family business. Now, we had Mike Flynn, who was running his own influence operation, $500,000 paid by an intermediary for the Turkish government. And it may be that simple greed and garden variety corruption is at the basis of all this, and not the hysterical claims of Russian collusion and manipulation of Americans. Now, one of the other things we learned from the inadvertent disclosure from Manafort's lawyers is that there were two different teams running plans, peace plans for Ukraine. One was Felix Sater and Michael Cohen, and the other was a guy named Artemenko. And Artemenko didn't know Manafort or Kilimnik, and he stressed that his plan for peace was different. The other loaded term that the New York Times routinely uses is they describe Manafort as pro-Russian. When he was advising Viktor Yanukovych, the kleptocratic leader of Ukraine, he was trying to persuade Yanukovych to align with NATO and the European Union. That was the foreign policy agenda of the United States. And it was Yanukovych who flipped on Manafort and everybody else and decided to align more with Russia. And I think it had to do with the influence that Putin has over the natural gas supplies that flow through Russia to Ukraine. I think that's the fundamental leverage that they have there. And so by repeatedly defining Paul Manafort as pro-Russia, I think that is a spin job. That is, it's deceptive, too, as well. I don't want to back off from that, but I can't say what the motives are to promote those kinds of false narratives. Now, at BuzzFeed News, we learn a little more about how this happened. Manafort's lawyers had been responding to the Mueller prosecution claim that Manafort had lied to them after he agreed to cooperate. That was after his first conviction in August, and then the plea deal he took on the second case in September or October. And it goes into some detail about the alleged misleading or deceptive comments that Manafort had made. And I have to say, based on this, and it's only partial, it seems that he wasn't 100% honest, but that he wasn't flat out lying either. And I'll just, if you want to go to BuzzFeed and check that out, you may have your own interpretation. Now, the Russiagate investigation, the Mueller special counsel operation, has been under the purview of Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. He had to take control when Jeff Sessions recused himself. Sessions is gone. We've got this Matthew Whitaker, acting Attorney General. He hasn't pulled any dramatic moves to limit or end the Mueller investigation. But Rosenstein has signaled that he will be leaving the Justice Department after the confirmation of Jeff Sessions' replacement as Attorney General. Now, William Barr is the nominee. I think he's going to have a rough road to confirmation because he has publicly criticized the Mueller investigation, and he would be an Attorney General who's not recused. Therefore, I don't know. I'm not sure that they can muster his nomination through the Senate. So Rosenstein may be cooling his heels there at Justice for several more months. Well, last night, we were all geared up for Trump to declare a national emergency and order money coughed up to build his frickin' wall on the southern border. He gave a wooden teleprompter address out of the Oval Office, and we'll get to the details of that in a moment. But it's been upstaged by today's follow-up meeting at the White House with congressional leaders. And the lead on the New York Times report, Trump slammed his hand on a table and stormed out of a White House meeting with leaders Wednesday after Speaker Pelosi said she would not fund a wall along the southern border, dramatically escalating the confrontation over the government shutdown. And here Trump delivers. Because Chuck Schumer's been talking about how Trump shut down the government as part of a temper tantrum. And so he threw a hissy fit today that I think will be characterized as a temper tantrum. And after he stormed out of the meeting, Trump tweeted, "Just left a meeting with Chuck and Nancy, a total waste of time. I asked what is going to happen in 30 days if I quickly open things up. Are you going to approve border security, which includes a wall or steel barrier?" Nancy said no. I said, bye-bye. Nothing else works. Well, he's having a hard time holding his Republican caucus in check in the United States Senate. So he went over to Capitol Hill. He had lunch with the Republicans. And in advance, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Capito of West Virginia, Collins of Maine, and who else? The guy from Kansas, Pat Roberts, who has announced he's a lame duck. Well, they all said that they were ready to cave and reopen the government without a wall. But Trump came out of the room saying that he has unity from his caucus. Now, it appears Murkowski did speak up, but Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia held her tongue, and so did Pat Roberts. So he came out thinking that he has control over most of the senators. And it's fair to say he does. He's like a mob enforcer. He held those mob rallies across the country, got a lot of these jokers elected or reelected, and they owe him. And he is certainly very, very willing to pressure them to collect on what he sees as their debts. So in some ways, it seems useless to talk about the speech he gave last night. I mean, when he invoked humanitarian arguments, when you heard Donald Trump talk about heart and soul, well, he just knew that this is nowhere near sincere. And there are a lot of lies in the speech. The fact checkers have been working overtime. And we'll get to some of the big whoppers that he spewed last night. But he didn't threaten to use emergency powers. And he really just renewed his demand for border security, and he made his case by misrepresenting the role of undocumented people in crimes in the United States. He exaggerates them. He finds one or two and just makes it seem like every undocumented person is a deadly criminal. And Trump, according to the New York Times, he lunched with some television anchors. And he bitched to them that he was being forced to give this primetime address last night. He said, "It's not going to change a damn thing, but I'm still doing it." He said the trip to McAllen, Texas, scheduled for Thursday, is merely a photo opportunity, and that's what I characterized it as yesterday. But he said his communications team like Bill Shine, former Fox News executive, Sarah Sanders, and Kellyanne Conway, they want him to do it. Well, it's interesting because I watched his speech. I forced myself to watch it on the Fox News channel. And then I stayed with Sean Hannity, who did the post-speech anchoring. And you see how Trump gets such a boost from his lying sycophants on Fox News. Bret Baier, who pretends to be this neutral eminence of journalism, he was there saying, it's just all common sense. We got a crisis, you got to build a wall. Common sense, common sense. And their number one talking point was, well, hey, Democrats voted for this before, back in 2006, and in, about 12 or 13, there was a Senate bill that passed with up to $39 billion worth of border security. And they try to say, well, they're only against this because Trump. But the facts are stubborn, and there is no crisis. There is no need to shut down the government. And a lot of people know that when they watch Trump go through these motions. Now, the Democrats trotted out Pelosi and Schumer, and it's drawing a lot of negative attention. They did look like undertakers or the Grant Wood, you know what I mean, the painting of the guy with the pitchfork. American Gothic, that's what I'm trying to remember. And they made some good points. Both of them mentioned that Mexico was supposed to pay for this wall, and they focused more on the government shutdown. That's their strategery, and I have some quibbles with it. But now to the fact checkers. Shepard Smith on the Fox News channel, despite all of the propaganda I just described, after Trump's speech, he broke down a number of claims that were deliberately misleading. While Trump issued scary warnings about murders by immigrants, Shep Smith said, statistics show there is less violent crime by the undocumented immigrant population than by the general population. In response to Trump's claiming his wall would stop drug trafficking, Smith said government statistics show that much of the heroin actually comes not over the unguarded border but through ports of call. And he informed his viewers that the number of illegal border crossings has been going down steadily over the past 10 years. And as for the trade deal he mentioned with Mexico, which he said would pay for the wall, that trade deal is not yet complete. Now, I've reviewed a lot of the fact-checking, and one whopper was not picked up by any of the corporate media fact-checkers that I've seen. And that is, he invoked the holiday shooting of a cop in California, Officer Singh. And this occurred in the little town of Newman near Fresno. And Trump has seized on this with the help of a sheriff there who's a big supporter of his, blaming sanctuary laws for this murder. And Trump lied. He said that the suspect in the case had just come over the Mexican border. Well, we know he was here in 2014 when he picked up a DUI that's on his record. And we're told that he actually had been deported once and had come back. But he was in this country at least for 4 years. And so Trump tried to make the nexus that the caravan brought this guy who immediately crossed the border and killed a cop. It is total bullshit. But he gets away with it time and time again. And the other big lie that the Democrats don't call out is that the gridlock over immigration legislation is by design, by Republican design. They have felt in the last 2 election cycles that they could profit from the misery of not solving our border issues and our immigration issues. And that is the fundamental cause of this. But the Democrats are listening to their pollsters, and they don't talk much about the things that I think are more persuasive. Now, this could have just crossed, so to speak, in the mail. But yesterday, on his second day in office, the new governor of California, Gavin Newsom, announced initiatives to try to reduce the risk of wildfires here in California. And this is welcome from my point of view. But what Gavin Newsom did is he joined the governors of Oregon and Washington in requesting from Trump federal help with our forests. Now, in California, more than 60% of the forests are controlled by the federal government. The state of California controls less than 10%, and the rest are in private hands. And so when Trump came out here with the ridiculous claims about, well, if you just sweep, if you rake the forest, you're going to reduce the risk of fire. And so Trump tweeted this morning, with misspellings of the word forest, he used 2 R's, billions of dollars are sent to the state of California for forest fires that, with proper forest management, would never happen. Unless they get their act together, which is unlikely, I have ordered FEMA to send no more money. It is a disgraceful situation in lives and money. Now, yesterday I released an in-depth interview that I hope you will listen to if you haven't already, with expert Dan Hirsch and journalist Dar Jamail. We talk about the Woolsey fire that devastated the Los Angeles area and how it started at a federal facility, the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Trump imagines that it was Sparky out in the middle of the forest who caused this. And that kind of misinformation and the role that the state of California's Toxics Agency has played in denying that there is any risk to the public from toxic releases from Santa Susana, well, these are compounded errors. And because Trump has these misguided ideas about what causes wildfires and what contributes to them, and he thinks he knows it all, we are stuck in this kind of nonsense zone with lives at risk. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. There's the amazing Terry Paris, the quilter from Berkeley, and Benny Alto, who's got subscriptions for each of his pups, Brian Mazzy, who sent an extra holiday gift to the Peter B. Collins Show, and on the East Coast, Dick Atlee in Maine. They all kick in $5 a month. Can you contribute $5 a month to your humble host? Well, I'd like you to do that. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, click menu, click Become a Subscriber. You're on the sign-up page. You choose $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. And if you're allergic to PayPal, yo comprendo. My mailing address, Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Yesterday, at the end of the podcast, I mentioned that the world's greatest crusader to close Guantanamo, British journalist Andy Worthington, is in the country for some events in Washington and New York, Friday and on Sunday. And from Guantanamo today, one of the great reporters who has covered it for years, Carol Rosenberg of the Miami newspaper, she filed a dispatch reporting that an attorney for the accused architect of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has told a judge in a secret session last year that the new CIA director, Bloody Gina Haspel, ran a secret agency outpost, a black site, at Guantanamo after 9/11. Now, this is unconfirmed, and of course, there's so much about the CIA director's resume that we're not allowed to know about. But this could be significant. Defense lawyers are arguing that Haspel's role at the prison precludes the possibility of a fair trial for the men accused of orchestrating the 9/11 attacks. Now, Haspel reportedly ran a CIA black site in Thailand where 2 terror suspects were waterboarded, probably before her arrival at Gitmo. Before her arrival at that black site. That is consistent with earlier reporting. But prosecutors say they're not trying to cover up torture, but they're not willing to talk about the names of the people involved in the torture, and that makes it impossible for people at Guantanamo who may have seen her when she was there as chief of base to identify her and talk about it. So if it occurred, it would have been in 2003 to 2004, and McClatchy, who published this story, includes a quote from John Kiriakou, the former CIA officer who's been a guest on this program many times after his stint in prison for acknowledging that we tortured people. He said he was offered the chief of base position at Gitmo in late 2002, but he turned it down. Nobody wanted the job. So he said they resorted to sending people on temporary duty assignments, and maybe that's what Haspel was given. How about a little relief from the bad news, the cynical kind of stuff that I cover here almost every day? Well, in Florida yesterday, the first of as many as 1.4 million ex-felons began to exercise their right to register to vote once again. Their rights were restored by a ballot measure passed by voters in November, and I, for one, am glad to see it. Also, clemency has been granted in the state of Tennessee to Cyntoia Brown. Her case is controversial and drawn national attention. She killed a man in 2004 when she said she was a victim of sex trafficking. And the governor, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam, granted clemency. She will be released in August. And finally today, I want to commend to your reading a great piece by my old buddy, David Bacon. Bacon has covered the labor beat for a long time, including the farm workers here in California. And at Truth Out, he published a recap of the successful hotel workers strike that was centered here in San Francisco last fall. And I was a witness to the protests at multiple hotels in downtown San Francisco, and I was really impressed with the unity of the members of the union and with the slogan that they decided to use. It came from the membership, not from a marketing firm. On all the signs and on their buttons and posters, the slogan was, "One job should be enough." And these people who have been working at very low wages without benefits for years have won major concessions from the Marriott chain, which, by the way, controls just about every hotel in the country now. I mean, the big ones are all conglomerized, and they're just brands on the front of buildings. They're not real, operators anymore. Anyway, I encourage you to take a look at this if you need a little inspiration as we face the evils of Trump and the Republicans on a daily basis. It might buck you up a little bit. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Please share it far and wide. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.